betrayed by my husband's friend. What I discovered after that night. It started with a sound, a tiny whisper of a notification from his phone. The phone that was usually glued to his hand, now just lying there, screen up, on the nightstand. It was past 2 a.m. A message from her. My blood ran cold, and not just because of the late hour. Seeing her name on his phone at that time, it felt like a siren blaring in the dead of night, signaling an emergency I wasn't ready for. Little did I know that tiny ping was the first crack in the dam, and a flood of unimaginable pain was about to wash over everything I held sacred. The life I knew, the love I cherished, the friendships I trusted, they were all about to be swept away. Before that night, my life felt curated. Pretty close to perfect, actually. I had Liam, my husband, who was, in my eyes, everything a partner should be. Attentive, loving, my rock. We'd built this life filled with laughter, shared dreams, and that comfortable rhythm you fall into when you're deeply in sync. And then there was David, Liam's best friend, sure, but over the years, he'd become my friend too. Our trio was a common sight. Barbecues, game nights, weekend trips. He was like the brother I never had, a confidant, or so I thought. The idea that either of them could intentionally hurt me, it was as alien as the sun rising in the west. But the universe has a cruel way of teaching you that even the brightest stars can shatter. This isn't just a story about an affair. It's about the disorienting agony of a dual betrayal, the kind that rips your reality to shreds and makes you question everything, including who you even are. And it's about what happens after the storm, when the pieces of your life are scattered all around you, and you have to figure out if and how you'll ever pick them up. Our marriage, Liam's and mine, was something I genuinely believed was strong. 15 years of inside jokes that still made us laugh until we cried, of knowing glances across crowded rooms, of weathering life's smaller storms together, and always seeming to come out stronger, or so it seemed. Liam was the kind of man who remembered my favorite flowers. He'd make me tea without me asking whenever he knew I was stressed. He'd hold my hand during movies, even the ones he found boring. Our home was filled with photos capturing these moments. Sun-drenched vacations, silly Christmas mornings, quiet anniversaries. It really looked like a testament to enduring love. David was a big part of that picture. He and Liam had been friends since college, a bond that felt more like brothers than just friends. When I came into Liam's life, David welcomed me with open arms. He was charming, funny, always ready with a helping hand or a sympathetic ear. He was there when my father passed away, offering a shoulder to cry on when Liam was overwhelmed with his own grief and trying to be strong for me. He helped us move into our first home, his booming laughter echoing through the empty rooms as we painted walls and dreamed about the future. We celebrated his job promotions, consoled him through his own breakups. He was family. There was this comfortable, easy dynamic between the three of us. Liam would often say, "You two get along so well, it's perfect." And I believed it. I trusted David completely, just as I trusted Liam. Looking back, were there signs? Hindsight is a cruel editor, isn't it? It highlights the things you barely noticed at the time. Maybe a shared glance between them that lingered just a fraction too long. Perhaps him texting Liam more frequently all of a sudden, or Liam suddenly being more guarded with his phone. Small things, so easily dismissed. There was that one time, months before, when David's new girlfriend had commented, a little too pointedly, that David seemed to talk about our life, Liam's and mine, an awful lot. I'd brushed it off as her being a bit insecure. Oh, the naivety. It's like living in a beautifully decorated house, completely unaware of the termites slowly eating away at its foundations. Everything looks perfect on the surface, but underneath, decay is spreading silently, relentlessly. I was living in that house, blissfully unaware, admiring the decor while the whole structure was about to collapse. Whispers and suspicions. The shift was subtle at first, like the changing of a season. It wasn't a sudden storm, but more like a gradual cooling, a slow creep of unease I couldn't quite name. Liam started working late more often. "Big project at work," he'd say, a tired sigh usually following the sentence. It was plausible, his job was demanding, but the late nights became more frequent, bleeding into weekends. Our easy conversations, once the best part of our evenings, became stilted. He seemed distant, preoccupied, his smiles not quite reaching his eyes. When I'd ask if something was wrong, he'd brush it off with a vague, just tired, or stress from work, you know how it is. Then came the phone, his constant companion. It was always angled away from me, or placed screen down. Texts would come in, and he'd offer a quick, dismissive glance, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Anxiety? Or was I just imagining it? I remember one evening, we were watching a movie, and his phone buzzed. He snatched it up so quickly, almost defensively, it startled me. "Just David, asking about the game on Saturday," he'd said, but his voice was a little too casual, a little too quick. A tiny seed of doubt, an unwelcome weed, began to sprout in the carefully tended garden of my trust. David, too, seemed different. Our interactions felt strained. The easy banter was replaced by a forced politeness. He started avoiding eye contact with me, especially when Liam was around. Once, I'd called him to ask for his advice on a surprise birthday idea for Liam, something we'd always done, collaborated on. His response was curt, almost evasive. He said he was busy, which was fair, but there was an edge to his voice, a discomfort that was new. He, who was always so involved, so enthusiastic about these things, I tried to talk to Liam about it, about the growing distance I felt between us, about the subtle changes in David's behavior. "You're imagining things, honey," he'd say, pulling me close. "Everything's fine, we're fine." He was so reassuring, so convincing, that I'd push my anxieties down, telling myself I was being paranoid, overly sensitive. Who wants to believe their world is tilting off its axis? It's easier to convince yourself you're just dizzy, but that gut feeling, that primal instinct, kept whispering that something was deeply wrong. It was like hearing a faint, discordant note in a beautiful symphony, almost imperceptible, but once you hear it, you can't unhear it. The harmony was broken, and I was starting to dread finding out why. It was a Tuesday, mundane, ordinary, until it wasn't. Liam had said he was working late again, another deadline looming. I'd made dinner, eaten alone, and settled into bed with a book, the familiar ache of his absence a dull throb in my chest. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, the clock on the nightstand glowed 2:17 a.m. Liam still wasn't home. A wave of anxiety washed over me, sharp and cold. I called his phone, straight to voicemail. I called again, voicemail. Panic began to set in. My mind raced through all the horrible possibilities. An accident, a mugging. I was about to call the hospitals when his car pulled into the driveway. Relief, so strong it made me weak, flooded through me, quickly followed by anger. He fumbled with the keys at the door, then stumbled in, reeking of alcohol and a sickly sweet, unfamiliar perfume. "Where have you been?" I asked, my voice trembling, a mixture of fear and fury. He mumbled something about a work crisis, a celebratory drink with colleagues that went on too long, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. He looked disheveled, his shirt rumpled in a way that didn't scream long day at the office, but something else entirely. And then I saw it. His phone, which he'd carelessly tossed onto the bed, lit up. A message preview from Sarah J. with a kiss emoji. Sarah, our friend, David's wife. The air just left my lungs. The room started to spin. "Who is Sarah J., Liam?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He froze. The color drained from his face. It's no one, just someone from work." But the lie was so blatant, so poorly constructed, it was insulting. Sarah J. David's Sarah, my friend Sarah, the pieces of the puzzle. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, David's awkwardness, Sarah's recent coolness towards me. They didn't just click into place, they slammed together with the force of a car crash. "Don't lie to me, Liam," I said, my voice gaining a dangerous edge. "Show me your phone." He tried to grab it, but I was faster. My hands were shaking so violently, I could barely unlock it, but I managed, and there it was. Not just one message, but months of them. Messages filled with declarations of love, secret meeting plans, explicit details of their encounters, and intertwined with those, messages between Liam and David. David, his best friend, apparently covering for him, helping him lie, even joking about it. The shock was a physical blow. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like my heart was being squeezed in a vice. "How could you?" I choked out, the words thick with a pain so profound it felt like it was tearing me apart from the inside. "With Sarah and David? David knew? He helped you?" Liam just stood there, his face a mask of guilt and fear. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. The evidence was glaring, undeniable. That night, my world didn't just unravel, it exploded. The man I loved, the friend I trusted, the other friend I shared coffee and confidences with, all of them had betrayed me in the most intimate, devastating way possible. The betrayal wasn't just one single act. It was a complex web of deceit spun over months, maybe longer, involving the people closest to me. The foundation of my life, everything I believed to be true and solid, crumbled into dust around me. That night, I didn't just discover an affair. I discovered that my entire life, as I knew it, had been a meticulously crafted lie, and the truth was a brutal, unforgiving force that left me gasping for air in the ruins. A world shattered. The hours that followed are a blur of raw, unfiltered agony. It was like being caught in a tsunami. The waves of shock, disbelief, anger, and a pain so deep it felt physical, just crashed over me relentlessly. I remember screaming, a primal sound I didn't recognize as my own. I remember throwing things, a vase, books, anything I could get my hands on. The shattering porcelain, a pale imitation of the devastation inside me. Liam tried to speak, to explain, to apologize, but his words were meaningless, like trying to patch a gaping wound with a flimsy bandage. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, the images from his phone, the words, the emojis, flashed behind my eyelids like a cruel, never-ending slideshow. The dual betrayal was what twisted the knife even deeper. It wasn't just Liam, it was Sarah, a woman I'd considered a friend, someone I'd shared laughter and secrets with. And David, Liam's shadow, my supposed ally, had been a willing accomplice, a gatekeeper of their sordid secret. How many times had he sat in my kitchen, drinking my coffee, knowing this? How many times had they all laughed together at my expense? The humiliation was like a burning acid eating away at my insides. The next morning, the world outside looked offensively normal. The sun was shining, birds were singing, people were going about their lives, oblivious to the earthquake that had leveled mine. I felt like I was moving through a thick fog, everything muted and unreal. I called my sister, my voice cracking as I tried to put the unthinkable into words. Her shocked silence on the other end of the line was a stark confirmation of just how huge the betrayal was. Telling Liam to leave was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but his presence in our home, our sanctuary, felt like a contamination. The space that once held our shared dreams now just echoed with his deceit. The silence he left behind was deafening, filled only by my own ragged sobs and the non-stop replay of that night. Then came the confrontation with Sarah. It wasn't planned. I bumped into her at the grocery store a few days later. The sight of her, looking so ordinary, so untroubled, sent a fresh surge of rage through me. I'm not proud of what I said, the words that poured out of me, venomous and raw. But in that moment, the pain was too immense to be contained by civility. Her attempts at justification, her tearful apologies, felt like salt in an open wound. There was no excuse, no explanation that could ever make sense of such a profound breach of trust and friendship. Those first few weeks were about survival, nothing more. Eating felt like a monumental task. Focusing on anything beyond the searing pain was impossible. My work suffered, friendships were strained as I tried to figure out who knew what, who I could possibly trust. My life, once a carefully constructed story, had been violently rewritten by others, and I was left staring at the smudged, incoherent pages, wondering how I would ever find my own story again. The betrayal hadn't just broken my heart, it had shattered my world. The initial explosion of pain eventually subsided, not into calm, but into a grinding, persistent ache. This was the beginning of the long, hard journey through betrayal trauma. It wasn't just sadness, it was a complex, disorienting state that consumed my every waking moment and haunted my sleep. Intrusive thoughts became my unwelcome companions. Images of Liam and Sarah together, snippets of their messages, my own agonizing questions of why and how could they, would ambush me at random moments. while I was driving, in the middle of a work meeting, even when I tried to distract myself with a movie or a book. These thoughts were like shards of glass embedded in my mind, each one causing a fresh stab of pain. My self-esteem, once pretty solid, plummeted. I found myself dissecting every aspect of myself, our marriage, searching for what I had done wrong, what I was lacking that would drive Liam into the arms of another woman, especially a friend. Was I not attractive enough? Not interesting enough? Not attentive enough? The rational part of my brain knew his choices were his own, but that insidious voice of self-doubt whispered poisonous accusations. Emotionally, I was a wreck. One moment, I'd be numb, unable to feel anything at all. The next, I'd be consumed by a rage so intense it frightened me. Guilt was a strange, unexpected visitor. Guilt that I hadn't seen it sooner. Guilt that I had somehow failed. Then there was the profound, bone-deep sadness, a grief for the life I thought I had, for the man I thought Liam was, for the friendships I believed were real. Sleep became a battlefield. Insomnia kept me tossing and turning, and when I did finally drift off, nightmares often jolted me awake, heart pounding, drenched in a cold sweat. Physical symptoms showed up too. Constant headaches, a knot in my stomach, a complete loss of appetite some days, and uncontrollable comfort eating on others. The betrayal by David, and by extension Sarah, added a unique layer of torment. It wasn't just my romantic relationship that was destroyed, but a significant friendship, a part of my social fabric. This dual loss intensified the feelings of isolation. Who could I trust now? If people so close to me were capable of such profound deceit, then how could I ever feel safe with anyone again? I found myself questioning my own judgment. How could I have been so blind? The shame was also immense, especially as bits and pieces of the story inevitably began to make the rounds in our wider social circle. The feeling of being publicly humiliated, of our private pain becoming fodder for gossip, was an added burden. It felt like living with PTSD. Loud noises made me jump. Any reminder of them, a song on the radio, a place we'd all been to, could trigger a fresh wave of anxiety and despair. My hypervigilance was exhausting. I was constantly on edge, scanning for threats, for signs of dishonesty in everyone I interacted with. Trust, the very bedrock of all relationships, had been systematically demolished, and the thought of rebuilding it, not just with Liam, which felt impossible then, but with anyone, seemed like an insurmountable task. This was more than just a broken heart. It was a deep wound to my soul, a trauma that had reshaped my perception of the world and the people in it. If you've ever felt a betrayal that cut this deep, a pain that seemed to rewrite your reality, or if you're finding yourself in a storm right now, navigating your own wreckage, I want you to pause and know you're not invisible, you're not alone. So many of us have walked through this fire. If this story, my story, resonates with you even in a small way, hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And please, don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the hardest times and the journeys we take to reclaim our lives. This is a community, and your voice matters. Share your thoughts, your experiences, or even just a word of support in the comments below. This is a safe space to connect and to heal together. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of raw emotion, but as the days bled into weeks and weeks into months, a new, more insidious phase began. It was the dawning realization that this wasn't a sprint to recovery. It was a marathon, an ultra-marathon, through terrain I'd never imagined navigating. The path to healing, I was learning, is rarely a straight line. It's a messy, winding, often frustrating journey with unexpected setbacks and agonizingly slow progress. Initially, I was just groping in the dark, desperate for anything that might numb the pain or offer a flicker of light. My coping mechanisms were a mixed bag. Let me tell you, some days, I'd throw myself into work with a ferocious intensity, hoping to outrun the thoughts that chased me. Other days, I'd collapse on the sofa, unable to do anything but stare blankly at the television, the hours blurring into a meaningless haze. I leaned heavily on my sister. Her unwavering support was a lifeline in those turbulent waters, but there were also moments I isolated myself, pushing away friends who tried to reach out, not because I didn't appreciate their efforts, but because the effort of explaining, of reliving the trauma, just felt too overwhelming. The grief was a constant companion, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't just grief for the loss of my marriage and friendships. It was grief for the future I had envisioned, the dreams we had built together, now lying in ruins. It was grief for the person I used to be. More trusting, more optimistic, more carefree. There were days I felt a flicker of hope, a tiny spark of resilience, only to be plunged back into despair by a trigger, a song, a memory, a casual comment from an acquaintance. I tried to make sense of it all, to find a reason, a why. But the betrayal was so senseless, so cruel, that logic offered no comfort. Liam's attempts to explain, to apologize from a distance. He had moved out, staying with a relative, felt hollow. His words unable to bridge the chasm of pain he had created. Sarah and David were ghosts, figures I avoided at all costs, though their spectral presence loomed large in my mind. I remember looking in the mirror and not recognizing the person staring back at me. Her eyes were haunted, her face etched with a sadness that seemed to have aged her years. The vibrant woman I once knew felt like a distant memory. There were moments I feared I would be lost in this darkness forever, that the pain would become a permanent part of who I was. The journey ahead felt impossibly long and daunting, and I had no map, no compass, only the desperate, primal urge to somehow, someday, feel whole again. There came a point, several months into the suffocating fog of grief and anger, when I realized I couldn't do this alone. The weight of the trauma was too heavy, the darkness too consuming. The intrusive thoughts were relentless, and the simple act of getting through each day felt like climbing a mountain. My sister, bless her, had been my rock, but I knew I needed something more, a professional perspective, tools to help me unpack all this emotional wreckage. Deciding to seek therapy was a huge turning point, a tentative step towards acknowledging how deep my wounds were and that I needed guided healing. Finding the right therapist took a couple of tries. It was really important to find someone I felt safe with, someone who understood the complexities of betrayal trauma. When I finally found Dr. Evans, a compassionate woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense approach, it felt like I could finally take a proper breath. Our sessions became a sanctuary, a place where I could lay out all the ugly, painful, and confusing emotions without being judged. She helped me understand that the overwhelming reactions I was experiencing, the anxiety, the flashbacks, the loss of self-worth, were normal responses to a completely abnormal situation. She validated my pain, which was incredibly powerful. Dr. Evans introduced me to coping mechanisms for the intrusive thoughts and the moments I felt emotionally flooded. We worked through the layers of grief, for my marriage, my friendships, my lost sense of security. She helped me understand that healing wasn't about getting over it, but about integrating the experience into my life story in a way that didn't define me, but rather informed my future. It was about processing the pain, not just suppressing it. Beyond therapy, I slowly began to rebuild a support system. Some old friendships had fractured under the strain, particularly those tangled up with Liam and David's social circle. It was painful, but also clarifying. I learned who my true friends were, the ones who showed up with empathy and patience, who didn't offer platitudes, but just sat with me in my sorrow. I also found solace in online support groups for people who had experienced infidelity and betrayal. There was an incredible comfort in knowing I wasn't alone, that others had walked this path and survived, even thrived. Sharing my story, even anonymously, and reading the stories of others helped to normalize my experience and reduce that profound sense of isolation. It was a slow, painstaking process, this act of reaching out and allowing myself to be vulnerable again. But each small connection, each moment of understanding, was like a tiny beacon of light in the overwhelming darkness. The journey from feeling like a victim to becoming a survivor, and then towards something that felt like empowerment, wasn't a straight shot uphill. It was more like learning to walk again after a devastating injury, tentative steps, plenty of stumbles, and a constant, conscious effort to keep moving forward. Therapy gave me the framework, but the real work, the day-to-day rebuilding of myself, happened in the small, often unseen moments. Self-reflection became a really important practice. With Dr. Evans' guidance, I began to explore my own needs, values, and boundaries, things that had, perhaps, become blurred or neglected over the years. What did I want from my life, from my relationships? What was non-negotiable for me moving forward? It wasn't about blaming myself for what happened, The responsibility for the betrayal lay squarely with Liam and Sarah, but about understanding myself better, about reclaiming my own power. Rebuilding my self-worth was a huge task. The betrayal had left me feeling fundamentally flawed, unlovable. I started small. I made a conscious effort to do things that brought me joy, or at least a sense of peace, before all this happened. I rediscovered my love for hiking. The quiet solitude of nature became a real balm to my wounded spirit. I started painting again, an old passion I'd let fall by the wayside. These weren't just hobbies. They were acts of self-love, ways of reconnecting with the parts of myself that had been overshadowed by the trauma. Learning to set boundaries was so empowering. This was new territory for me. I'd always been a bit of a people pleaser, often at my own expense. I started saying no to things that drained me, and yes to things that nurtured me. This extended to my interactions with Liam. We had to communicate, inevitably, about practical matters, the disentangling of our shared life. I learned to keep those conversations focused, to protect my emotional well-being, refusing to be drawn into arguments or pleas for reconciliation before I was even close to ready to consider such a thing. There were small victories along the way. The first time I went a whole day without crying. The first time I laughed genuinely. A deep belly laugh that surprised even me. The first time I looked in the mirror and saw a flicker of the old sparkle in my eyes, now accompanied by a new resilience. These moments were milestones, proof that healing, however slow, was happening. I began to journal extensively, pouring out my thoughts and feelings, tracking my progress, acknowledging the setbacks without letting them derail me. It was about piecing myself back together, not as I was before, because that person was gone, but as someone new, someone forged in fire, scarred but stronger. If someone had told me, in the immediate, agonizing aftermath of that night, that anything positive could ever come from such devastating wreckage, I would have laughed bitterly, or maybe just stared at them, numb. Yet, as time moved on, as the sharp edges of the pain began to dull, I started to see unexpected lessons glinting amidst the ruins. This experience, as horrific as it was, became a crucible, forging a new level of self-awareness and a resilience I never knew I possessed. One of the biggest lessons was about my own strength. I had always considered myself relatively strong, but this ordeal pushed me to limits I didn't know existed, and I survived. More than survived, I was slowly, painstakingly, learning to navigate my way back to life. This realization, that I could face the ultimate betrayal and not be utterly destroyed by it, was incredibly empowering. The betrayal also forced a total reevaluation of my life and my relationships. It stripped away the superficial stuff and brought into sharp focus what truly mattered. I learned to tell the difference between genuine connection and friendships that were more for show. I became far more discerning about who I allowed into my inner circle, valuing authenticity and kindness above all else. The clarity that came from this was, in its own way, a gift. I also learned how important it is to listen to my intuition. Looking back, there were subtle red flags, those tiny discordant notes I dismissed. The experience taught me to trust that inner voice, that gut feeling, even when it's whispering something uncomfortable or inconvenient. Perhaps one of the most complex lessons was about forgiveness. For a long time, forgiveness felt impossible, an insult to the pain I had endured. Dr. Evans helped me understand that forgiveness, if and when it came, wasn't about excusing their actions or letting them off the hook. It wasn't even necessarily about reconciliation. It was about releasing myself from the corrosive burden of anger and resentment. Forgiving Liam, Sarah, and David is still a work in progress, an ongoing internal negotiation. But the first and most crucial step was learning to forgive myself for not seeing, for not knowing, for the misplaced trust. This self-forgiveness was a pivotal moment in my healing, allowing me to finally start letting go of the shame. The wreckage was immense, but within it, I found a deeper understanding of myself, a renewed sense of purpose, and an unshakable belief in my own capacity to heal and grow. Today, several years down the road from that night, my life looks very different, and so do I. The scars are still there, not as raw, open wounds, but as reminders of a battle fought and survived. They speak of pain, yes, but also of resilience. I am not the same woman I was before the betrayal. That naive, trusting part of me is gone, and I mourn her sometimes. But in her place is someone stronger, more discerning, and so much more self-aware. My relationship with Liam didn't make it. The breach of trust was too deep, the dual nature of the betrayal too catastrophic to overcome as a couple. The divorce was painful, another layer of grief to process, but ultimately, it was a necessary step towards my own healing and independence. We co-parent our dog, civilly, from a distance. There are moments of sadness for what was lost, for the future we didn't get, but those moments are now tinged with a quiet acceptance rather than that sharp, acute pain. My approach to relationships, both platonic and potentially romantic, has completely changed. Trust is something I now give more cautiously. It has to be earned through consistent action and transparency. I value honesty and open communication above almost all else. My friendships are fewer now, but they're deeper, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine care. I've learned that quality trumps quantity 1,000 times over. The journey to empowerment hasn't been about finding a new happily ever after in the traditional sense, but about creating a life that is authentically mine, a life where I feel secure in my own worth and clear about my boundaries. I've continued to invest in myself, in my passions, my well-being, and my personal growth. There's a quiet confidence now that wasn't there before, a sense of peace that comes from knowing I faced the worst and emerged, not unscathed, but whole. This new chapter is less about avoiding pain, because life will always have its challenges, and more about knowing I have the strength and the tools to navigate whatever comes. The journey from that unforgettable night of shattering betrayal to where I stand today has been the hardest and most transformative experience of my life. Discovering my husband's affair with his closest friend, our friend, felt like the end of everything, and in many ways, it was. It was the end of my marriage as I knew it, the end of cherished friendships, the end of innocence, and the end of the world I had so carefully built. But it was also, unexpectedly, a beginning. Through the intense pain, the intrusive thoughts, the crushing weight of trauma, and the long, winding road of healing, I found reserves of strength I never knew I had. It was a path paved with tears, therapy sessions, difficult conversations, and countless small acts of courage. But with each step, no matter how shaky, I moved further from the wreckage and closer to myself. The experience taught me huge lessons about trust, resilience, self-worth, and our incredible human capacity for healing. I learned that even in the deepest darkness, there is always the possibility of finding light, not necessarily by erasing the shadows, but by learning to live with them, and ultimately, by outshining them with our own rediscovered strength. Thank you for listening to my story, for walking alongside me through this difficult chapter. If this has touched you in any way, or if you know someone who is navigating their own storm of betrayal and needs to hear that healing, however improbable it may seem right now, is possible, please share this video. Subscribe for more content on overcoming adversity, finding your inner power, and rewriting your narrative after life throws its biggest challenges your way. And above all, remember, no matter how dark the night, the dawn will eventually come. You are so much stronger than you think. You are not alone.